There we go. So you know that I've talked about pet obesity before. And when I say obesity, I'm kind of clustering together being overweight as well as being obese, because let's be real, when pets are so much smaller than us, the line between those two is so blurry, and either way they're both unhealthy, so it doesn't really matter what you label it. But we've talked about it in the summit, we've talked about it in coaching, we've talked about it in workshops, and it's not a thing that goes away, because it is one of the 5 biggest killers of our pets, is carrying all that excess weight. And it's not necessarily the weight per se, but it's all the health implications, and realistically the way that erodes your longevity, erodes your organs, erodes all those things, that causes the death, right? So just because you're fat doesn't mean you die, but it is a cause and effect. So, but anyway, my point in all that is that yesterday I came across the latest figures for the UK. And I've been talking about this for ages, saying it's 65% of pets are in this category, right? Which is horrendous, because if you look at 40 years ago, it wasn't anything like that. But in actual fact, it's even worse, because the numbers that were released that I saw yesterday, 74% of pets, 74%. So that if that's not 3/4, it's so close it may as well be, right? Like 3/4 of pets. So that's something that is 100% in our control. And this is what makes me can you even get happy about things like this? But this is where the good news part comes in. It's like when you talk about heart disease in people, right? It's the number 1 killer of people, but the good news is that it is so very avoidable. There's a million things you can do, right? So this is not a foregone conclusion. And so the good news, the silver lining in this number, is that that's down to us and what we do. So we can choose to feed them more than they need, and we can choose to feed them rubbish food that doesn't give them the nourishment and will pack on the pounds, or we can very easily make a decision and say, I'm going to do something better, and then take all of that danger off the board.
Well, I think there's a few really interesting pieces to pull out here. One is that you talked about quality of food over quantity. Yes, quantity matters, but a lot of it has to do with quality food. And I've definitely heard a lot and experienced myself with my own fur babies that when we switched to quality food, they actually ate a lot more and lost weight. So that's a really interesting point. But then the second piece to that is, I get the feeling, tell me if I'm wrong, I get the feeling that most pet parents don't know if their pet is overweight. Like, if you asked 4 people on the street, is your pet overweight? I can't imagine that 3 of them would say yes, when statistics say that it would be 3 out of 4. What are your thoughts on that?
Right, that is such a valid point. Thank you for reminding me about that, because I get so used to knowing that it's easy to forget that. But no, that's actually happened, because they've done studies now on the humans to say, check out your pet. Is your pet overweight? Is your pet obese? Is your pet underweight? Right? And the majority of people cannot tell. The majority of people who have a pet who falls into an excess weight category think their pet is in the normal healthy range. Like, we've become kind of page blind to the wrong morphology, the wrong shape of our animals, because it's now so prevalent that to see one who is normal weight, people go, oh my gosh, you need to feed your dog a bit more. Like, I'm a bit worried about the welfare here, right? And it's just like, no. Au contraire, let's look at this properly. So you're absolutely right. And so for anyone who's thinking, oh my gosh, might that be me? Shh, don't tell anyone. I suggest go and have a quick Google for a body condition score chart. All right, body condition score chart. These will be all over. Like, you just go to Google Images, right? You can find them. And there'll be one for cats and one for dogs, and it will show you a gradation of either 1 to 5 or 1 to 9, depending on how discrete the scale is, of where does your pet sit. And you can have a look at that by comparing like how much of a tummy tuck does the dog, assuming the dog's head's here, right? How much of a, like here's the chest, how much of a tummy tuck do they have, or does it sort of bulb down? If you're looking from above over the spine of your dog, do you have an inward on the hips, or is it just a smooth barrel all the way down, right? How many like neck wrinkles are there? If the dog lifts his head up, do you get bulge, 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 or is it smooth, right? So there's lots of little areas that you can look at, and you can also do the knuckle test, which we've talked about before. So if
talk about the knuckle test, yeah, because that one's really powerful and easy.
Because well, so it can be tricky for dogs because dog morphology, dog shape changes dramatically. So if you're looking at a chart that says, okay, well, this is what an Alsatian should look like, but you've got a beagle or a Chihuahua or something else, like it's like, well, I don't know, I'm guessing here. So the knuckle test is great. So when your hand is relaxed and flat like this, you can feel as you run your finger across your knuckles that there's a little bit of up and down, a little bit of up, like a little bit of up and down, right? And that's what you want to be feeling on the side of your dog. So if you run your hand along the rib cage on the side, we're not talking on the tummy, but we're talking on the side here, and you can feel a little bit of up and down, up and down, up and down, your dog's in great shape. If you can't feel that, it just feels like a smooth wall, your dog's already pushing into the excess weight category. Yeah. And if you have the very rare exception where the knuckles are, like if I create a fist now, those knuckles are really pronounced and the up and down dip is too much, that would be a dog that's underweight. Yeah. But most people are not in that category. This is for like neglected animals and abandoned, things like that, rescues. So most of the time, unfortunately, when I feel an animal, I'm like, it's a smooth wall. There are no ups and downs. So we already know there's excess weight. So if you can't do it with a side chart or a top-down body condition scoring chart, you can do it with a knuckle test.
So essentially, if you're having to push your fingers in and feel like, oh, I think I can feel those ribs. Oh, like.
Yeah, don't try and convince yourself it's not there. Because the more you lie to yourself, the more your animal will suffer.
I was doing this with, I won't name names, but a family member, their pet. And I was like, okay, feel. And then they were like feeling, they're like pushing. They're like, I can definitely feel. I'm like, yes, they do have ribs, but you're having to dig. Like,
but it is not block therapy where we're going to dig into the.
Yeah, but to your point, it is shocking for people to see an animal where you can see their ribs a little bit because they think that is so unusual, and that goes back to that differentiation between what's normal and what's optimal. So it's normal to have a chubby pet. It's not optimal. Can you speak about, just sort of touch on, in case folks don't know, why is it so detrimental for a pet to be carrying extra weight? Like, how does it, you said it sort of indirectly significantly affects their longevity, and does it affect their lifespan as well as their health span?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because you think about this, your organs, your vital organs, your pet's vital organs are there to keep you, they keep you alive. If you lose one, you're pretty much sunk, right? You just have to lose one. So the as soon as you start chunking up, right, then there's more work your organs have to do than if you stayed the right weight. So with a fat pet, their heart is having to work harder. Their kidney and liver is most likely going to work harder because they're most likely in that scenario getting low-grade food, low quality. It could be super expensive, branded vet, like all this and that, but it's still low-grade food, right? Because it's not even food, it's feed. So the number of toxins in that is so high that the work that the liver and the kidneys have to do to filter that, to detoxify the body, they're constantly being overworked. The pancreas is having to go insane, right, with the amount of blood sugar, because pets shouldn't be eating sugar. So when I say sugar, I'm talking about a carbohydrate. So we have sugars, we have starches, and we have fiber. So the pets need the fiber and a little bit of the starch maybe, but they don't need the sugars. And when you look at the food packet, right, if you add up the food things, protein this, crude ash that, whatever, it doesn't add up to 100%. You'd be really lucky if it adds up to 50%, with the numbers that they've actually got on the label, right? So the other 50% or more is carbohydrate, which will become sugar, which is what your pet doesn't need. So their insulin is having to go insane to like mitigate that increased blood sugar. And so when that happens, the pancreas is going to cop out. And so you have diabetes in pets, and you do, right? It's off the chart, right? So you get, with obesity and overweight comes excess strain on the organs, comes diabetes, becomes excess strain on all the joints, right? And the tendons and things like that are supporting that structure. So now all this excess weight that's there. If they come down from a jump and land incorrectly, there's less tolerance for them to have a safe landing. Now they've got an injury, okay? The whole time you've got excess fat in the body, it's white fat. It's not brown fat like from a puppy, right? It's white fat. It's going, releasing toxins the whole time. So you're now increasing your chronic inflammation, which is the precursor of all diseases. So the chances are, if you getting overweight and having no issues is zero. The chances of your dog or cat being overweight and having 5 or 6 health issues is unfortunately, as you say, the normal, right? You're most likely going to have all those complications. Then as soon as the gut goes out of balance, from inappropriate food not supporting the microbiome, you now have behavioral issues with the gut-brain axis. So now you have a reactive dog, you have a neurotic dog, you have a dog with phobias, you have a hyperactivity. Like, it's just on everything you can imagine. Their health goes down, their immune resilience goes down, their cell functioning goes down, and of course that has an impact on longevity.
Well, it's interesting because essentially what you're saying is the sort of starting place goes back to species appropriate nutrition, obviously one of the pillars. And if that's not happening, then we see overweight and obesity in addition to everything else. So it's like the overweight and obesity in my mind is sort of like a symptom as well, that's pointing back to the root cause, as opposed to if you are still feeding your pet kibble and you're just restricting to try to force them to lose weight, you're not really addressing the issue. So
you'll actually make it worse at that point for a couple of reasons. One, because the body will go, oh my gosh, we're in a famine. There's hardly any food. Everything you give me, I'm going to store in my body, right? I'm going to put that into like long-term storage so that we can survive the famine. So what does that mean? That means it's going to convert it to fat and stick it on their body somewhere instead of burn it and use it for living life. The other thing is you're making them malnourished because there's hardly any nutrients in trash food anyway. That highly processed, super commercial, whatever, there's hardly any nutrients in it. So the more you restrict the bowl size, the fewer and fewer nutrients they've got. So the sicker and sicker they're going to get because they can no longer perform basic cellular function. Creating some ATP for energy, flushing a cell, moving some water around the body, really basic stuff. So that's the wrong answer on so many levels.
Right. At that point, their body is going to be moving, and probably behavior too is going to be moving into more of a survival mode versus a thriving, a healing, repairing, restoring. Like none of that's going to happen. It's the same thing. Like if we translate that to humans, where it's harder to get pregnant, right? If you're malnourished or you're not eating enough, right? Often women will lose their menses because the body is saying, I can't grow right now. I just have to stay alive. And so it goes back to sort of the hormonal imbalances that can occur. Okay, so people who are listening are probably convinced at this point, okay, I need to go upstream. I hope so. I need to do the Nuggle test and see if my pet is at an ideal weight. But what are the action items? So you've obviously talked a lot about species appropriate nutrition. So speak about that for just a moment. And then is there anything else that you would kind of bring into that as well?
It's super simple. It really is. So it's feed raw and so raw species appropriate diet. Okay, I'll expand on that in a second. Feed raw, feed less often, and filter your water. So that's, honestly, a 12-year-old can understand this. So raw species appropriate diet, no animal cooks, and I'll say it again, no animal cooks. Okay, so in the wild, where they don't get fat and they don't get cancer and diabetes, they eat raw food. Maybe there's a clue there. So let's give them what they're supposed to eat. What were we going to say?
I was going to say, you said a 12-year-old could understand. I was talking to my nephew about this last week. He's about to turn 9, and they just got a puppy, and he was asking me, because I had Peanut with me on this trip, and he was saying, like, he saw me feeding her raw food, and he was like, oh, what is she eating? And I was like, she's eating raw meat and vegetables. And so he literally, I'm not even kidding, he got out his iPad. He's 8 years old. He got out his iPad, he started taking notes. And he was like, okay, that makes sense because wolves eat raw meat. And it was like, it took him like a second versus when I tell adults this, like, what are you feeding your pet? And I'm like, raw meat. And like, but what about this? And what about this? And I have my dog on high quality kibble. And it's like, we overthink because of these messages we've been told. But it was like, he was so easily just like, great. What kind of meat? What kind of veg? What can't they eat? And it was like,
right? It is so not complicated.
Okay, so feeding them raw, species appropriate, feeding them less, and feeding them less often. What do you mean by that?
So less, we typically overfeed our pets because as an act of love, we love to share food. It's a way of bringing us together. So what I strongly suggest people do is to find out what the ideal body weight is for their pet. Okay, so if you're a female husky dog, you should weigh in around about that. If you're a boy beagle, you should weigh around about that, right? So find out what your ideal body weight is for the pet that you have, and then calculate what 2 or 3% of that is. That is their meal allowance, their food allowance for the entire day. And when I say food allowance, I'm talking about it includes breakfast, lunch, dinner, however many meals they have, plus their snacks and treats. So all of that 2 to 3% of their body weight is their full food allowance for the day. Now, most people are inadvertently overfeeding because they haven't taken 5 minutes to do this calculation and then start to train their own eye to see what's the appropriate portion size. And the good thing is when you're feeding raw species appropriate food, all of the nutrients are in there. It's so dense with good stuff that you do actually typically have less of it in the bowl. So you'll have to overcome your grown-up brain going, I'm starving my dog, I'm starving my cat. No, you're not. You're feeding them appropriately. So that's what I mean by less. And then less often, we want to allow our pets to have a period of time where their digestive system is not actually operating. So it can go to sleep, proverbially, and actually start to restore, regenerate, and replenish itself. So when we go to sleep, we turn our brain off, and that allows our brain to rest and to heal and to wash itself and all those things. But if we are constantly feeding our pets from dawn till they go to bed, or we go to bed, when does their digestive system get a break? Because if there's food in their stomach when you go to bed, it's going to keep working all through the night to process that food because it's not going to just sit there. So you need to allow them at least 12 hours where there's no food going in the mouth. So that's what I mean by less often. You can do all of their meal as one meal, or you can have 2 meals of the day, but there's only an 8-hour window. So now we have 16 hours before the next feed. So examples like that, there's no one right way. There's lots of different ways you can accommodate this. But we want to give that less often side a chance because now we can heal and replenish, and now we're supporting those organs and allowing them to stay young and healthy.
Well, I think a lot of folks listening might be experiencing that little mind blown emoji right now. But believe it or not, this is like barely scratching the surface. So I know there's a lot more baked into this aspect of nutrition. Species appropriate nutrition, and then nutrition is just one of the 7 longevity pillars. So there's so much more in here to dive into, but this is a really great little overview for folks to start with the foundations, and those foundations go a really long way.
Because otherwise you're going to be one of the, or at least your dog or cat is going to be one of the 74%. Because if you take the default road that most people take, 3/4 of those are leading to a really dangerous health situation that's going to halve their lives, well, reduce their lifespan dramatically, right? And also diminish their quality of life. So like I said at the start, it's 100% in your control. You're the one who's buying the food, making the meals, putting it down, deciding how much it is. All of that is you. And it honestly takes 5 to 10 minutes to figure this stuff out and make the decision that you're going to change. And then you're saving their life, honestly.
Love it. Well, for folks who are, if your interest is really piqued as you're listening to this, we have some pretty exciting things coming up. We haven't announced them yet, but stay tuned over the next few days into early next week, because we have a live event coming up where you can join us and dig into all of this a little bit more. So I'll just put that little pin there and stay tuned. And we will be back next week for another live. If you're loving these lives, remember to subscribe to us on YouTube, and then you'll get a little notification when we go live. If you're not able to come on, if this time doesn't work for you, you can always watch the recording. Let us know your thoughts on this. What did you learn? And we will see you guys next week.